All right, YouTube, you may have seen Donald Trump has surged again for what is it now, the fifth or sixth time, getting up towards the untouchable level of 40% support in a race that still has 13 people in it. And I told people if Donald Trump manages to form a long term support floor, that is sort of the general level below which he won't go unless he has a stroke or suddenly takes out his dick and starts beating off on the debate stage or something. If he manages to stabilize that floor at around 33% or so, he's pretty much got the nomination sewed up. He's appears to have done that. It's not clear yet. You see, the problem with establishing where his floor is that he would have to go back down and then stay at that lower level for a substantial period of time. Uh, Otherwise, we can't really tell in advance whether 36 or 37%, which is what he appears to be at, is his peak, or if it's a new norm, or what it is. We can't really necessarily tell. What is clear, though, is that his support is above the quarter of the GOP electorate. That alone gives him a pretty good shot because that's higher than any other single candidate's peak so far has been, including Carson when he managed to crest. He's crumbled into irrelevance. Trump has overtaken Carson in Oklahoma now, where he had held out for some time. In Louisiana, they haven't updated the polling. I guess probably Carson will be back in second or third by then, by the time they update that poll as well. In New Hampshire, it's actually kind of funny. Chris Christie somehow is in third place in New Hampshire. He's a distant third. I mean, Trump is still far in the lead, and then Cruz and Christie are sort of battling it out, and Jeb's kind of, I guess, fourth place or something. It's actually very funny. Chris Christie has also just managed to supplant Jeb Bush as the fifth place candidate. Jeb Bush is now running in sixth. I believe for the first time. I don't think he's performed this poorly at any other time in the campaign. He just lost a little more support, and Christie rose a little bit. Um, at what point does a person who he's got the big name, he's got the big fundraising machine, he should be up there at Marco Rubio levels or something. At what point does he sit back and understand the gig is probably up? It's not entirely clear. Jeb is just holding on, selling more guacaboles, I suppose, at this point. He just doesn't know when to quit it. Carson's out of the way. Now it looks like it's basically a two-man race. And I think I can roughly predict, if nothing else changes in this race drastically by the first three states of the primaries, that is New Hampshire and Iowa, and then South Carolina as well. If nothing else changes, my expectation is Trump getting the nomination, Cruz finishing a strong second, specifically because of support within the heartland. Now, when else did this exact scenario sort of play out in the GOP field? Oh, that's right, it was the last time around. Rick Santorum, who right now is in last place, I believe, and is not really registering in any poll. He has less than 1% support, according to the most optimistic polls. Rick Santorum was number two the last time around. He actually won, I think, about a dozen states, did fairly well, and he won those states because he had the rural outside sort of Tea Party support. That's exactly what Ted Cruz has. The fact that Ted Cruz is still a good 15 points behind in the overall national poll shows this. Donald Trump is even a little bit like Mitt Romney, rich, sort of, so-called self-made billionaire figure, older, very white, seen as out of touch by the population. I think the difference this time around is that the opponent which is Hillary at this point, has shown herself to be just as clueless, doesn't have the ability to self-fund, is doing the fundraiser thing, and has a lot more baggage. Obama, his only baggage was from his first term as a U.S. president. Hillary Clinton's got several decades worth of baggage built up: First Lady, Senator, Secretary of State, the Clinton Foundation stuff, Benghazi, Libya, everything under the sun. That's going to weaken her as a candidate, and with her lagging youth support and a lot of the younger voters saying, well, Sanders or bust, basically. No, I don't think she's going to win. I already discussed that previously, but Trump has hit a new high. It's not clear that this is either a peak or a new norm. He could go back down. What we've seen, if you look, link again in the description. I'm going to look at this, so I'm not looking at myself right now. If you look, around August, Donald Trump had about 22% support, and it stayed stable for quite some time before he rose. He then fell back down, and everyone declared, oh, it's the end of his campaign, he's collapsing. What they didn't realize is it was merely collapsing back down to a long-term floor. That brings us to October. His new floor is around 24 points, 23, 24, somewhere around there. And again he rose, right before Carson peaked. And then he went back down, and Carson had like, what, a 0.1% more support for a couple of days. Based on a handful of polls, everyone declared the end of Trump. Oh, it's the new paradigm. Carson will be the nominee. And I had to warn at least one person off who swore up and down Carson would be the nominee. I said, sorry, folks, just not going to happen. Too black, too crazy, too evangelical. He's not even like Rick Santorum. He's Herman Cain 2.0. And that's exactly what's happened. Now he's down at a distant fourth, falling further. He's going to continue to fall. By the time the primaries roll around, he'll be lucky to have even double-digit support because his long-term floor is around 6 points. What's he at now? About 9 points. He's got a few more points to shave off. He probably will. Most of that will go to Cruz. Cruz will probably be at least at 20-25% by the time the primaries roll around. The thing is, most of that support he's siphoning off of candidates who are holding massive support in rural enclaves. Well, Donald Trump doesn't give a fuck if he loses, some buttfuck state, some flyover state in the heartland. He doesn't need to worry about those votes because he's probably not going to get all of those anyway. The fact that he's going to retake first place in Oklahoma means this shouldn't even be as close as it was last time around, again, unless there is a major shift in either the national conversation or if he severely underperforms in the starting states, like he manages to barely eke out a win in a state where he should be leading by 10 points. That may cause problems for him. There's no reason, though, to believe that that's going to happen. All of the discussion about Trump being factional, short-term spike in support, that sort of conversation was over by October. At this point, people need to give up that line. You may hate Trump, but he is the front runner. He has been the front runner now for almost half a year. So let's at least give him credit for being the front runner and not pretend that he's just an imaginary candidate that will crumble right before the primaries. I don't see that happening. He could continue to rise. He could end up at 45%. He'll be undefeatable if that happens. At 40%, he's virtually undefeatable because of the slew of other people sharing the vote, especially in the urban states. In a state like New Hampshire, where Christie is in second, Christie could theoretically win the state if it weren't for the existence of Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush sharing that establishment centrist urban and suburban vote. He could win New Hampshire. That would launch him on to win at least, maybe grab up his home state, some more of New England, maybe the West Coast. Maybe we'd see a Christie candidacy actually win the primary system. But because the field's so packed, that's not happening. The problem is all of these rural outsiders are the ones that have been spiking. Carson and Fiorina, namely. And Ted Cruz, he might be doomed to the same fate. Let's face it, is somebody else, Rand Paul, could suddenly skyrocket to 15%. Ted Cruz could collapse. And what you see over and over again, like in 2012, the only fixture of the race that remained dominant throughout the race was the perpetual frontrunner for most of the race, Mitt Romney, who, in his case, he had the backing of the establishment. Trump does not. But there are more than a few people within the establishment sharing the establishment vote. That's the problem. And Trump is close enough to that urbanite core to appeal to that same centrist establishment. That's just fucking people like Jeb over even harder. Meanwhile, the outsiders that could actually challenge Trump, Carson, Fiorina, Rand Paul, and so forth, they spike in popularity because they have one big debate moment. They put out one good ad. They get one really good poll result from one major swing state. They rise. Then they do something crappy, or they lose their composure, or they lose the attention of the media, and then they fall back down. That's why I knew that Carson was going to do that. That's why I knew that Fiorina was going to do that. We saw it in 2012. We've seen it time and time again. People who spike that quickly tend to go back down. The only person who's managed to do it and stay up there is Trump. And now, in November, he's got a floor at around 25%. Now, it looks like he's actually formed a new floor at around 29 or 30 around the beginning of December. If that's the case, then we may see going into the primaries. I expect him to win New Hampshire. I expect him to win South Carolina. I expect him to lose Iowa, though. I believe Ted Cruz will win Iowa, unless, again, if this is just a short-term boost in Cruz's support and he doesn't stabilize and form a higher floor. If he ends up going back down, he could, Trump could sweep all three. I expect Ted Cruz to win Iowa and go on to win a lot of the heartland states, but think about it, those are all rural farming states. They don't have a high population. They don't have a lot of power at the RNC's actual deciding table, and they're actually bereft of even more power because the GOP, in a bid to make itself more effective within swing states, counts the votes of the bluer or swing states, which tend to be more urban. It counts those votes as being worth a little bit more. That is, you need fewer supporters per, I can't remember what the term it is for the people that actually go to the convention and cast their votes. You need fewer votes if you're getting them from an urban center than you do from a rural area. Well, if Ted Cruz takes the whole fucking heartland, hell, he could take the Great Lakes states too, and he would still lose the nomination. It would still be Trump. There's no reason to believe that Rubio or Christie or any of these other sort of second-tier candidates that are below Trump and Cruz are actually going to win a single state. There's no reason to believe that any of them will win anything. I think we've moved into a two-man race now. We're getting quite a bit closer very quickly to the actual beginning of the primaries themselves, and it really all hinges on those first three states. Trump needs to win two of them in order to maintain his dominance, specifically because his campaign relies upon either the sense in the population, or you could term it the illusion that he's invulnerable, that he's going to get it, he's all-powerful, he's the one to fuck with Hillary Clinton. His fans probably do believe that. People who don't like Trump probably say, well, it's just a bunch of bullshit. He's just manipulating people. Okay, well, you'd say the same thing about Hillary Clinton, let's face it. Let's be honest here, and not partisan. From somebody who's not going to vote for the GOP and who's not going to vote for the Democratic Party, let's just be honest here. You can say that about any candidate you want, except maybe Rand or Sanders. Going into it, though, Trump needs two of those first three states. He can lose one of them. Now, if I had to say, Iowa's his best chance of losing one of them. South Carolina, I think he's probably got sewn up. Nobody's really competing with him there. So that one's probably safe. New Hampshire, he might face a little bit of resistance from Christie if Christie spikes now, right before the primaries. Ultimately, I think he'll carry it anyway. And it would actually be interesting if you have a different candidate winning each of those first three states. Then it would throw the whole race into uproar. You'd see Christie taking a few states, Cruz, Trump, it'd be mayhem. But I don't think that that's actually going to happen. People need to let go of the illusion that he's just a short-term factional candidate based on the fact that he has been the front runner since the end of July, half a year now almost. He has barely spent any money. He has barely run any ads, yet he is the GOP front runner by a rather large and seemingly growing margin. The growth of Cruz support is coming at the expense of rural candidates, people, again, like Carson, outsiders, rural, they may be more evangelical. Ted Cruz appeals to them. The evangelicals are a dying force within the Republican Party. We saw, again, once more, 2012, Santorum spoke for, I thought he was a jackass, but the GOP lay people thought he spoke fairly well. He said fairly good things. He knew how to whip people up in rural areas where people were focused on different issues than the core GOP that backed somebody like Mitt Romney. Therefore, he finished strongly in second place, but he never had enough support to actually get the nomination. It was impossible. It was fundamentally impossible because the maximum number of people that would have supported him in a plurality of the U.S. states was well below the threshold needed to actually win. And here it's even more difficult for somebody like Cruz because, again, there are several other outsiders taking at least a few points off. Santorum didn't have to worry about that. You think Ron Paul, with his libertarianism, was stealing votes from an evangelical? No, not any more than he was stealing centrist votes from Mitt Romney. He had his entirely different, much smaller camp. Now, though, there's some overlap there. Carson and Cruz are similar enough in their style that if Carson maintains 6 or 7% going into the primaries, also expected. That's where his floor is. I don't expect him to fall much lower than that. Cruz doesn't really have a chance. He may end up losing most of the heartland. Imagine if Donald Trump ends up getting like 45, 46 states. Try denying him the nomination then. Try doing a brokered convention then. It's just not going to happen. You need a very close race to justify, sort of passing him over for somebody else. I don't think they have the guts to do it, though. They would piss off so many people within the GOP that, I mean, I don't know where they would go as far as their voting, but they wouldn't stick. I think a lot of them would abandon the GOP. The Karl Roves of the world, what good is it to get the candidate you want if you know that candidate starts off with, one arm and one leg tied behind their back because you've just pissed off a third of your own party? It's not a good thing to do. By the way, Romney probably would have done better and won a few more states if the GOP hadn't disenfranchised Ron Paul's voters the last time around. Hopefully they learn from their mistakes if they want to actually compete with Hillary. Because even if Hillary Clinton is weak and vulnerable compared to then candidate Obama, because she's older, she's not black, which does, by the way, matter to the Democratic core. She's not as young. She doesn't have the youth appeal. She's not as far left also. She's more of a corporate centrist than even Obama was when he was running. She's just not as dynamic. Even if she's weak, she'd still steamroll the GOP if the GOP starts off pissing off a quarter or a third of the entire GOP electorate. Because it wouldn't, they could get all of the independent votes at that point. They could all say, well, we're going GOP this time because fuck Hillary. It wouldn't matter. You'd still lose. You'd lose every swing state. It'd be suicidal. So for the GOP, that's a little bit of a warning. Don't piss if you do decide to pass up Donald Trump and he does end up winning a plurality of states, you're up shit creek without a paddle and you're going to lose the election. Hillary Clinton will be our next president. And I don't think that you want that very much. Oh, wait, that's right. The Karl Roves don't really care, by the way, because they're in collusion with the DNC, the establishment, that is. They all love the Clintons as much as they love the Bushes. That's why Jeb is so sad right now, because the race is so crowded. It's the one thing that they didn't count on, the race being this crowded with outsiders who are naive enough to think they have a chance. They don't really, but they're providing cover for the outsider that does. Yeah, it's a new peak for Trump. I expect him to be the nominee. We'll see what happens in the next month and a half or so before the primaries. I don't even know exactly what day they begin. I'll be probably primarying for Rand Paul. I will state my opinion there, even if I don't intend to vote for the GOP. But, I might as well give my primary vote to the best candidate within the GOP with the best ideas. It won't be going to Trump. Certainly won't be going to Hillary or Jeb or somebody like that. So, that's about all. Peace out. If I can stop the video here.